How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, great dialogue today. We're going to talk about the essentials for report writing. I think it's going to be a great topic. My guests today are going to be Russ and Joe Pomponio. We're going to kind of break down a few things. We're going to talk about, the difference between formal and informal reports. We're going to talk about structure, what you should put in a report, what you shouldn't put in a report, the legal side of it all. And basically the different types of reports. We'll name a few, but we're really going to focus on the incident reports and maybe investigative reports, because those to me usually have the greatest foundation, because guys, in corrections, we are loaded with tons of reports. But I think that the advice that we'll give for the incident reports and the investigative reports will play out with those other reports. I'm actually currently writing a book on report writing. So with that said, this dialogue plays out great because I can add a lot into that. But it's going to be a very big book because you know me, I like to try to do things all encompassing. I literally really crossed into so many different areas of report writing. It's actually pretty impressive. It's not as simple as people may think. So I'm very proud of what I'm putting together right now. I'm actually already on chapter 7, but we're going to go over some of that stuff now. So hopefully within a few months or so, whatever we go over, we'll be putting a nice size book and passed over to you guys who may need it for training. And again, when it comes to report writing, there's so many different reports. So even though I mentioned some of the reports, and we'll mention different reports today, the main reports usually are incident reports and investigative reports. If you guys can understand how those work, usually the other reports kind of just utilize those same tips to be just as effective. All right, guys. So books on the market, Inmate Manipulation Decoded. This book is available on Amazon, used for training all across the country. If you haven't gotten this book, I highly recommend it. And link to this is in the description. And guys, this is still doing well. It's been on the market for years now, and it's still doing well. I think almost 2020, maybe 5 years. We got How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned While Working in Prison, and Tips for New Correctional Officers and Their Supervisors. Both these books are available on Blue 360 Media. Guys, there's tons of advice here, just different tips and strategies, not just from myself, but from other people in the profession. They're just good random thoughts and passages that you could read, or very discussion worthy. If you have in lineup, it's good to bring some of this stuff up. And if you're looking to get these books, you can find these books on Blue 360 Media. I got another deal working with them now for 3 more books. I got one book coming out on inmate behavior, very similar to this book. And what I mean by similar format-wise, but it is obviously a different topic, but I meant similar as in format. And then I got another book, Passage, similar in format like this. Passages from me, and then support quotes from the people in the profession, kind of about leadership, stuff like that really relate in context to correctional supervision, or just working in corrections, because technically I believe that we're all leaders, whether we have the position or emerging. You got to be a decision maker in this profession. And then I also have an upcoming book, as I said, which I'm still working on. I'm on chapter 7 now, and it's going to be about report writing. And like Russ mentioned before, report writing can be a very dry topic. So I'm adding scenarios in it, and even in the scenarios, it's got a lot of nuggets in there that you could pick up from. I got a scenario about a transport, a scenario about a simple story about an officer who wants to take some extra training, but the agency doesn't have the funding or the budget for it, and or even the staffing. So he winds up doing it on his own, and winds up trying to, go back to the leadership to try to share what he learned, and nobody cares. So I try to make these very relatable, and I love doing the scenarios. I think they're fun. They add a little life to the book, so it's not so dry. And today we're going to do the same. It could be a dry topic, but I think as we discuss the report writing, you're talking about people like Joe and Russ that got hands-on experience. So in the process, as we're educating you, we want to go ahead and give you some real life experience in those reports, or in that advice that we're going to provide. All right, so let me get Russ on. What's up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going, sir?
Good, brother. Hey, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yeah, my name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer And I currently work for a private company that does reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county probation department and a local county jail where I'm the case manager. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos. And I think that about sums it up.
Russ, how's Keepers of Chaos going? Let's get some updates on that.
Oh, well, we're rapidly approaching the 6,500 member mark. And on top of that, every single day, I have new people show up and people, asking questions and being fed good content. I really try and control what goes on with regard to the membership there so that everybody is doing their best to actually, advance good knowledge, good dialogue, and all the other things that go along with trying to run a forum and a group that's really dedicated towards the professional side of what goes on in corrections.
Yeah, if you guys are here now, you get a chance, please check out Facebook group. It's a tremendous group. It's got some mentoring going on. Just, it's a group that really welcomes everyone as a family and tries to help people grow in this profession, whether you're new, whether you got time in, whether you're a supervisor, moving up an admin, or even if you're retired and you're looking back trying to give advice. It's just so all encompassing. As long as you work in corrections, and it could be proven that you work in corrections, civilian staff as well, you're more than welcome to join the group. We got Joe Pomponio from Texas. What's up, Joe?
What is happening, guys? How are you guys doing?
Good, hanging in there. Any mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, or Texas Department of Corrections, of 29 years, 6 months, and 18 days. Currently working as an assistant jail administrator here in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
And we love having you guys, Joe, Russ. Hey, guys, so real quick, I do believe this is training that's needed. There's a finesse to report writing. We all know that. I mean, how you structure a report, the details that you add, the way you make it, chronologically order, like basically it's telling a story, the scope, what is this report going to provide, the purpose of the report. The more detailed you are, the more concise, the more that report's going to keep its integrity all the way up in case it's ever needed to court. And obviously one of the best advices I was given, and I'm sure you guys heard it too, old school advice, is whatever you write, you got to prepare as if you're writing it at the highest level of the court system or the legal system. So I think that this topic is definitely needed because I feel there's gaps. One of the gaps I feel is that you're offered this type of training at the very beginning, but some facilities or some agencies don't keep the training up to date. I mean, there's newer technologies when it comes to report writing. There's always different policies and procedures as what's needed, what's not. There's always constant changes because a lot of these things end up in the court system. So you figure if there's rulings that go either way, we go back and we adjust as an agency. Now, I wanted to break this down, and I am going to break it down into a few areas that I think are worthy of just a good knowledge that you need to write an effective report. And what we'll do today is we will structure a little bit of a formal dialogue, but we're also going to go ahead and kind of break away a little bit and share some stories just to make it a little bit interesting. And if it's a lengthy show and you guys can't watch it all at once, you could piecemeal it out because there's going to be a few sections which I outlined. But before we go there, I just want to make sure that people know that there's going to be many different reports in corrections: disciplinary reports, investigative reports, use of force reports, administrative reports. I mean, the list goes on. But one of the basic foundations for all report writings is usually going to be incident reports, even investigative reports to some extent. But the incident report is really the heart of our writing. So if you really could write a good incident report, if you could know how to detail it, know how to, create it in chronological order, really tell the narrative that needs to be told, that usually carries a lot of weight into the other reports that need to be written. So I would like to say that, a discussion like this could cover all reports. It can't. There's just too many of them, but we'll give you enough of a foundation to know, that you can easily apply to the other reports that you need depending on where you work inside the facility. Again, you have food service may have to write reports, maintenance may have to write reports, but understanding incidents and investigative reports. Even the book that I'm writing, big I do mention all the different types of reports to some extent, not all of it's not all inclusive, but my main focus was on incident reports and investigative reports, because I figured those two pretty much encompass, what you're going to need in regards to the essentials for writing reports. I'll go with Russ first before we start the dialogue. Russ, I mean, do you think this is necessary, Russ? Good formalized or informal type of training on report writing?
Yeah, there's so much to, actually turning in a good work product with regards to a written report that we actually have to spend a lot of time on this, and we can, eke out a few really good solid points that people should, pick up and take home with them or take back to their facility, as it were. But, being constantly involved in it, forcing yourself to actually, churn out work product, learn from your mistakes, get input from people, take the input under advisement, because not everything that you get is going to be gospel. A lot of people have some, in my opinion, wrong opinions about what it is that they're actually doing with regard to that. But take all of those things in and just start becoming better at putting it all together. I've written reports that took, many pages, 15, 20 pages long, that involved sometimes hundreds of inmates. And, over the years, I was able to really solidify my skills, because I was willing to jump in and take the bull by the horns and be able to, actually turn out that type of work product that required a lot of effort and a lot of time behind the scenes to be able to, do everything from charge inmates to report uses of force, to being able to, help justify what I had done in certain instances. So you really can't spend enough time actually making yourself good at this, because the difference in what you do can change and perhaps even save your career. What we do is deadly serious on a day-to-day basis. And so you should be able to take this mantle up and be able to become a really good report writer and a really good, incident writer and everything else that we put on this. I know we have some different terminologies here, but you should be polishing your skills every single day.
I agree. And I wish more people would take these type of training seriously, not just the people that are on the front line, but also management. If there's a chance to offer training in regards to report writing, it should be done, and really should be done in a proactive measure and not more of a punitive side. Actually, in the book I'm writing, I actually mentioned where you mess up, that's when they give you the training. And it's like, well, that's not really a good reason for me to want to take the training. That's kind of starts it off bad. I want to embrace it. So it's like, oh, well, we got to give him training now because he messed up that report. Well, okay, well, maybe that's our fault for not being proactive and giving him more training. Now, when the person takes training, they may not think they need it, or they're just not embracing it because they feel it's punitive by nature. Hey, Joe, how important is a video like this today?
It's very important because, report writing is one of the most essential things that we can do in our job duties that will paint a clear picture for anybody within or outside the facility to describe to them how a situation happened, why it happened, and what we did to control that situation. It's a lot of people don't think about how and where reports go once we write them. I've had some end up in jurisdictional investigations. I've had some end up in federal investigations. Which, on both I had to testify, so there's the possibility of a lot of people seeing reports. So I wholeheartedly believe that this show is pertinent to the fact that we bring attention to how serious, how influential, and how much we depend on the reports that we get from our peers and, from our subordinates.
Yes. And I'm going to mention something, guys, as we move forward. I do want people to understand that what we're trying to provide here is an effort to help us grow. But if your policies and procedures are slightly different, this is more of just to maybe, work with the policies and procedures, of course, don't get me wrong, but we don't want to shift you from, okay, we got the show. This is what we told you. Go ahead and, go run out in the world and start writing your reports that way. That this is just more of advice, but we want to make sure that you guys don't take this advice blindly. The last thing we want you to do is start taking our advice and realize that for some reason it's in conflict with what your agency wants. So again, I like to think that we're all consistent in this manner, but we may not be. So just bear with us on that. All right. So first thing I want to discuss real quick is I want to get the difference between informal and formal reports. So for me, I got some notes here. So let me just read a quick little note here that I have. For an informal report, we have an informal reports are concise documents used primarily for internal communication within an organization. They're designed to quickly convey information, updates, or findings without the need for extensive detail or formal structure. These reports are often used to keep team members informed about ongoing activities or issues that require immediate attention. We actually have daily logs actually are considered informal reports. Memos could also be informal until solidified in policy. Brief summaries, etc. Brief summaries are more of like summaries of meetings, project updates, or progress reports, whatever. The characteristics of a informal report is brevity. It's less structured. It's more internal use. It's not really meant to travel out, even though if you do have those informal notes, they could be subpoenaed by the courts, by the way. I looked that up, and that was true. Very direct language, and when it says timelessness, it often produced and distributed quickly to address immediate needs or updates. I know I like to mention something real quick. I always had a little notepad with me to take notes. Usually what I did, I would take notes if I was in the heat of a moment, and then I would go ahead and translate those notes when I can, as soon as I can, to the logbook. And that's when, once you put it on the logbook, it would become very formal at that point, because that logbook is the first thing you pull when there's an incident. Hey, I'll go with Russ first. Hey, Russ, any, would you be able to give us maybe some more examples on informal and formal note taking, or informal and informal documentation?
So generally, when I think of informal documentation, I think of things that are, more of a collective nature, like we talked about with regards to the logbook, and things that don't necessarily make it onto a specified form. A lot of that can be in the form of emails and other communications. And, even though this kind of focuses more on the writing aspect, we do lots of, verbal type of reports as well, where we're just talking about, what inmates are doing, what gangs are doing, what the hot topics are on the yard at the moment. And sometimes those make it into some written form. But those are things that are sometimes not really very traceable, in that, they're just kind of our own housekeeping rules with regards to the way we do things. When we start talking about different forms, though, and stuff, that's the more formal aspect. Like we always had, the CDCR 115 process, which was our disciplinary form. And then disciplinary forms were sometimes, then also put into incident reports if we had a reportable incident where we had, a felony or drug discoveries or staff hurt in the line of duty and those kind of things. So, it's just like two different things. It's not really worth getting too down in the weeds, I don't think, with that. It's just good to recognize what is what and to understand when you really kind of got to up your game in order to report something, especially if it's going to end up being looked at by an outside agency.
And Joe, what's your thoughts on informal and formal? When's a good time to use an informal, I guess, little note taking, and when's it not a good time to use it?
Well, for me, informal and formal, informal is for me is kind of more of a FYI that that this is what took place, and kind of to raise awareness to somebody that the situation took place. Something that didn't rise to the level of, any kind of force or whatever the case is. It's more for informational purposes that, this discussion happened, this situation happened. To me, it's more of a warning than it is anything. Whereas your formal reports are, okay, that, it was a little more serious than the informal. And, we had to do something about this situation, some sort of immediate response was needed at that point. So at that point, it became formal. I guess the best way you can kind of describe it is the difference between a ticket warning and an arrest report. The ticket warning is, hey, FYI, you were speeding. This is what happened. I'm just raising awareness that, you were speeding, and, going to the formal arrest report. Hey, you were doing 35 over the speed limit, and now you're under arrest. And this is what happened on this date and time. And, it's more indicative towards, giving specifics about a situation, where your informals are just a generalized version of the whole scenario, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with that. I mean, obviously for me, the informal stuff was for me also to note patterns. I think what I tend to do is, if I, maybe saw something with an inmate behavior that may at that point may not be worth reporting officially, but let me just take a note of it as a reminder to go check on it again, and then see if there's patterns developed. Little maintenance concerns I may take a note of, like little things. Again, not necessarily to be officially in a log or official documentation, but just enough to me to identify patterns, or just to be mindful of, let me go visit it again. And then, as I said, also I may even write informal notes to structure my thoughts, and then go ahead and put it on that formal logbook. And guys, and the funny thing about that formal logbook is the old school method, where you actually write in the logbook your mistakes. If you make a mistake, you can't just white it out. You got to cross it out with one line, initial it, because people need to know. This is how, they need to know what you originally were going to put in. So again, having that little notebook, be able to, get your notes ready before you put it in. I also want to mention one more thing when it comes to the formal documentation. The formal documentation for me, I guess in short, is all about what has the chance to be pulled to the highest levels. So like an incident report is definitely something that can go into the hands from the officer or whoever to the supervisor, all the way up to administration, all the way up to the legal system, straight up on top for some of them have actually been used in court cases in which we won or which we unfortunately lost. But I mentioned incident reports, investigative reports, annual reports, research reports, audits. I mean, these are the reports, there's many, but these are the reports that you're definitely going to find have heavier weight to them, because at any time, they're the official document that people go to first. That's the key. For me, formal documentation is the first thing that people go to, because they know it exists. I may not know Russ kept informal notes, but I know Russ works a unit where everything's documented. So I need that first. And then later on, I may find that Russ has informal notes, which I could also pull. But the big thing about the formal documentation, it's more structured, it's more detailed. It has both external and internal use. It's got more of a professional tone. It's got more of a purpose and accuracy, and it's something that could be utilized. This is key here too, and this matters. Formal documentation can be utilized to present an argument. So when you write your formal documentation, you do want to make sure it's clear, it makes sense, because that is what's going to be a reflection of you. Your formal reports are 100% a reflection of you. If you don't take time to write those reports and make them sound good, you're going to look totally like an idiot when you're up there and you can't piece together what you wrote, because it's so many years ago, and now all you have is the report that you wrote. So that's another thing. And I'm sure you guys would agree with that, right? These reports tend to be utilized years later when you forgot about the whole incident. What's your thoughts on that, Russ? Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. When you're writing that report, the more details that you put in, the more flavor of the moment, if you will, that you put in, the better it's going to be for you when you get to reread that thing, especially if it's a court proceeding or something. The better it's going to go for you to help jog your memory and to think about things that you thought you had forgotten. at that moment in time. And, that might be the difference between being able to get a successful prosecution, maybe on an inmate who has, assaulted and battered or stabbed staff or something. So those things really do count. You do want to be, somewhat cognitive about the way you document things, so that it does jog your memory and so that you can preserve the aura or the penumbra of the incident, if you will, because that will help you down the line. If you just put a few basic facts in there, it won't necessarily do that. You really want to be able to capture what that moment was like for you, to be able to recreate it in your own mind, however many years later.
Yeah, and I want to mention something with that, Joe. Maybe you could pick up on this too, Joe. It makes sense. Is that when it comes to those formal reports, like Russ said, and the fact that you could be called up at any moment to go ahead and speak on a case that you may not even remember because it's so many years ago. I truly believe how you write it, concise, detailed. If I'm ever called to the courts and I'll be like, okay, I'm sorry, you got to refer back to the report. I don't remember. I deal with inmates every day. This one doesn't really stand out. So again, you got to refer the report because they're going to try to get you to get off that report. They're always going to try to get you to get off that formal report. So your ability to write that good report, at the moment it happened, will be your crutch. It will be your crutch if something ever happens and it gets to the higher level court system, or even if you're investigating on an internal issue. Would you agree with that, Joe? I mean, it does become that crutch. So why not put the effort and time into what's going to wind up saving your career?
Yeah, I mean, when you write a report, especially at the beginning of your career, for me as an example, I have one where two inmates got into a fight in the day room and one slashed the other with some razor blades wrapped in tongue depressors with medical tape. There was a lot that went on that night, and I remember the general situation, but I don't remember the specifics. So, the report writing, the energy that you put into a report is something that, can help jog your memory later on, because you may forget about certain details that one of the attorneys, the defense or the prosecution may ask you about. And, if you didn't put it in your report, you can't testify to it because, you can't remember it. And I laugh because this specific incident, the guy was actually that they were prosecuting, the guy that did the slashing, excuse me, was, 10 years later found insane and couldn't stand trial. Fast forward another 17 years. And now all of a sudden this guy is able to stand trial, and they're actually going to bring this to trial. And I got subpoenaed for it. And I mean, I didn't even have a copy of the report I wrote that night. I just, I wrote it and I turned it in, gave it to my lieutenant. And thankfully they still had a copy of it. And there were details in there that I had totally forgotten about that actually even had taken place. Like I said, you may remember the generalized aspects of what happened. But if it's something that carries over in time, the specifics, tend to fuzz out a little bit because, life happens, things happen, we deal with more and more inmates over our career, more and more situations, more influential situations take place. And we tend to put the smaller things on the back burner and lose details. So the amount of energy that you put in a report is paramount because, like I said, the specifics are the things that, some of the small details are some of the things that you lose. And, if you have that in your initial report, that's something that can jog your memory later.
Yeah. And I agree. And that's also why it's also good to take, notes, whether formally or not. So, that you have those details when they happen, as opposed to trying to recall it later, after the moment has passed. I mean, sometimes, and we'll talk about that later on, the psychological aspect of report writing where, once you go through the moment, you may forget most of the details anyway, because you're writing on high emotion. And I want to mention one more thing before we go to the structure, which can be a bulk of our dialogue, is that there's a lot of people that really don't know the difference between informal and formal reports or documentation. And what they wind up doing is they wind up overburdening the system with informal documentation. There's documentation, as I said, informally, let's say that's meant to note patterns, but not every interaction. It's meant for you to maybe follow up on, but it's not really meant for you to report right away because, again, you have discretion, you have ability to solve most problems. But with that said, there are a lot of people here that kind of have a CYA mode or maybe a diffusion of responsibility where instead of them taking onus and write like maybe something informal for themselves to check up on or whatever it is, they're quick to make an informal report formal, and they just start overburdening the system to the point where the system is like, yo, this could have been handled with just a verbal, dialogue or a discussion or an interaction. I'll give you one example, and then maybe I don't know if you guys have an example of someone overburdening the system, but in the book, I was thinking of one, and I wrote an example in the book about an officer who writes up everything. It's just what they do. They write up everything. An inmate's got a twisted ankle. He talks to the inmate. The inmate said he was already seen by medical, but he's like, you know what? I don't know if you have or not. So instead of him calling medical and trying to get confirmation, he winds up just writing a report and submitting it. And at this point, it winds up having medical doing another appointment because his inmate was already seen, but now they got to do it again because when you formalize a report, it prioritizes that report. There's another issue with maintenance where there's a little leak. He writes it, and instead of maybe having trying the verbal way first, it kind of, again, it prioritizes the concern and shifts. So again, I think for people that tend to want to diffuse responsibility or tend to, maybe cover their own ass, because this is probably the big part of it all, are those that try to cover their own ass, is that they write formal documentation for everything that may not require for formal documentation. And then you wind up overburdening the system. We even mentioned the scenario of the disciplinary where you have a concern, very minor, and you got an officer that writes up every minor thing. We're talking about more of a senior officer, senior officer that's developed discretion, not a rookie. And what happens is you wind up overburdening the disciplinary system. And then you're probably getting the disciplinary people like, yo, this could have been handled with just a verbal interaction. And then, it just overburdens the system. But I'll start with Joe first. Joe, but do you believe or do you agree that you do have people that may not know the difference between informal and formal, and what they tend to do without discretion or discerning what the issue is? They tend just to elevate something that's rather informal and just kind of override the system with reports, as opposed to maybe handling it within their discretion. If they can't, then seeking for help where it may need a more formal approach.
Yeah, and it does happen. On our disciplinary reports for TDC, at the bottom of the report, which is an official report, it's an official record. But at the bottom, it asks you if formal resolution is appropriate. You could still write the report, circle yes for the informal resolution. And when we input it on the inmate's record, it just goes down as an informal resolution, an IR, with no punishment imposed, no nothing. It's more of a, hey, this happened, and this is my written warning to him. But you do have those employees who write a formal report on everything and everything. Insignificant. I mean, some employees have pet peeves. Some are clotheslines, some are extra necessities, some are, unkept cells, whatever. And, because they get tired of repeating themselves, they tend to write formal reports on everything. Well, after a while, minor charges add up to major charges. And then, when they start going to the disciplinary hearing officers, they run your major cases for major hearings. They're looking at a history of minor infractions, that really should have been taken care of with a verbal approach before it got way to that point. So, yeah, I mean, it does overburden the system because, like in Texas, our minor cases actually cost us roughly, I think it was $48 for each minor case that every lieutenant had to run in a minor disciplinary hearing.
Mm.
and it was close to $75 for every major case that a captain had to run, because you had to involve a counsel substitute, multiple copies of the disciplinary, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it can be overtaxing at times.
Yeah, and I like what you said too, the example, because even with the minor one, the informal report or the informal note taking, whatever it is, documentation, whatever it is, as I said, develops the pattern. So now if you do have a person that's constantly, just doesn't listen and constantly violate and lose minor rule infractions, well, then you can go back to your informal documentation and say, you know what? I've talked to this guy 5 or 6 times, and that informal documentation, if you did, note dates or times, whatever it is, that could be utilized to write the person for the bigger charge. So, and it's unique about that because at first it may be something small, but then when the person keeps on, just violating that one rule, when you put them all together, you can write them for the major. Maybe it's just outright disobeying a direct order. It's like, I know it may have been about hanging up extra pictures, but I've told you 5 times. I told you A, B, C, D, E, and F. That's when I told you. That's where I told you. So at this point here, I'm going to elevate it up a little bit because I have the pattern. And then now that informal little documentation actually holds weight to the formal charge that you're going to write. Would you agree with that, Joe? I mean, I'm sorry, Russ, that, if you use the informal note taking as if it's formal and just, I'm going to document everything just to document the CYA, you do overburden the system, because then in my mind, I'm thinking like, yo, does this guy want to step up and do anything on their own?
Yeah, kind of the problem that I have with that sort of thing is, people are, taking themselves off the line to deal with administrative chores rather than the interdictory and, the beat patrol type of chores. I kind of often wonder whether those people, really want to be there in a position to, be effective, or just try and be out of the way in case something happens. That might be a really jaundiced and biased way to look at it. But I was always of the mindset, hey, I'm out there, I'm looking for the felonies, I'm looking for the things I can do to impact in a positive way, and just burdening myself with a bunch of housekeeping chores. I would often ask, my officers out there, what is it that you're trying to do? You can't run this unit based on your presence and on your verbal skills and orders. You have to resort to paper in every case. People need to learn how to run their unit based on presence and based on verbal orders, and not have to resort to the paper all of the time, because it takes you out of a position to be more effective and possibly impact things in a huge way with regards to saving lives, et cetera. If you're always trying to just get out of being out there where you should be, which is on patrol, in my opinion, dealing with things that are actually happening in the unit. But like I say, maybe that's my own personal biases talking.
Yeah, and now, guys, I want to talk about the structure of a report. The structure of the report, it's a simple structure in nature. It's an introduction, then it's a body, and then it's a conclusion. So those are the 3 things, one, that you want to make sure that that you are writing with that template. But there is a lot more that goes into an introduction than people may think, a lot more that goes into the body, and definitely a lot more that goes into the conclusion. So I think what we'll do now is we're going to kind of discuss what I would like to see in an introduction, maybe different than what Russ likes to see, maybe different than what Joe likes to see. And then we'll go to the body, and then we'll go to the conclusion. All right. So for me, what I like to see in an introduction when I'm reviewing my reports is I do like remember, the incident report is a lot different than a disciplinary report. Disciplinary report could be just a quick note of the rule violation, how the person broke the rule, whatever it is. I mean, but the incident report is where it's everything. That's what everything leans on to support whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish. So for me, the introduction, and I'm read some notes here. It takes the stage for the report by outlining its purpose, scope, and objective. It provides the reader with context and an understanding of what to expect in the report. The components, it typically includes background information, the reason for the report, and any relevant context or history that's necessary to understand the main body of the report. And like if you read a book, books are going to have an introduction that provides you with the context of what someone is about to enter into, what someone is about to read. You got to realize something. When you write a report, you know the context. So if you don't introduce the reader to the context, they're not going to be as familiar with what it is that you are trying to accomplish with that report. So the introduction is basically a context. It provides some background information that's going to aid the body of your report, because the body is really the main part of the report, but you have to introduce it, and you want to have it be concise, detailed, but it's real quick. It's not something that has to be fully extended and elaborate, but rather it's quick and to the point. You provide the context. You provide, some historical background if needed. But one of the things that I think people forget to write in an intro, and then I'll go with Russ first and Joe, is they forget. Mind you, we're only talking about the introduction right now. They forget to write the purpose and the scope. And when I tell you later on in court, when you have an intro and it explains the purpose and the scope, when people try to ask you questions from the courts that go outside of those two things, you could literally say, hey, the report didn't cover that. The scope was literally about a use of force that started from A, ended at B, and you're asking me about something that happened after that scope of that report. So again, if you look at the report, the scope is right there. It gives you what I'm trying to cover within that range. And as for the purpose, right in the beginning, you could even say, like, whatever, I'm writing this report, whatever it is, the purpose of this report is to note a use of force incident that happened on this unit at this time and date with inmate such and such. And then we'll go to the body, and that will become more specific. But, hey, Russ, I want to ask you first, Russ, and I do agree with this. Now, it's not done everywhere, because I've seen people write reports that are so quick and so vague because they believe that the less they put in, the less it can be challenged. That's not the case. The less that you put in makes the report ambiguous. And then what happens is, if you ever go to the courts, it gives a chance for people to ask more questions. It gives a chance for people to seek clarity. So hopefully, you decide that, making it quick and just noting, superficial stuff just because you're thinking it's going to protect you. Wait till you go to the courts and that report becomes your crutch. You just screwed yourself. But Russ, when it comes to the introduction, and I know you have some scenarios here, do you agree a good introduction sets the stage for the report by outlining the purpose, the scope, and the objective? It provides the reader with context and an understanding of what is expected in that report. And again, the components, it typically includes background information, the reason for the report, and any relevant context or history that's necessary to understand the main body of the report. So you're introducing the concern or the incident report to the reader. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Okay, so when we're talking about scope, one of the things that we had in CDCR is the very number of the type of report that was kind of explanatory to what the purpose of the report was. So if we were doing a CDCR 115, that particular one would be about a disciplinary, and it would say it right on there, right? So that would kind of, show what that was. But it's also kind of contextualized a little bit by itself in the fact that you have to put the actual number of whatever the offense was on there. So it kind of, how would I put this? It would kind of, self-classify itself to a degree, the same as an incident report kind of would, where we're using a more general and broad kind of look at things. So what I would generally do, especially if it was a disciplinary, but also within the confines of an incident report or something, I referred to it less of an introduction and more of summary paragraph. So I would say something like, I would set the stage, right? And we want to know all the W's, right? The who, what, where, when, and possibly if I was using force or something, then I would often give the why of the things that were going on. And so I would put down, on January the 1st at approximately 0900 hours, and then I give the place, in front of the chow hall. Inmate Anderson approached me in a rapid and threatening manner and committed battery on me by striking me with his left fist or whatever, right? And so that's the summary paragraph, and it just kind of like gets everything out there so we know those W's. We know who's involved, which is inmate Anderson, and we know what his offense was: battery on a peace officer with a closed left fist or whatever, right? And so that's the little synopsis that we give, the summary paragraph, and then at some point right then there we go down and we start filling that out in a more comprehensive fashion. We talk about maybe history that happened earlier in the day that set the inmate off, though that may or may not be it. That's up for the hearing officer to decide. And we flesh things out in a much more specific manner. And we talk about all of those things. And we want to make sure that in the body of that we hit all the necessary elements of the crime, right? The elements of crime, for instance, on something like, battery on a peace officer is, I have to tell, hey, what's my title? I'm a correctional officer, or I'm a correctional sergeant, and, contained within the penal code is where we get our peace officer powers. So did he commit battery on a peace officer? Yes, he did. And then we talk about, the manner in which he did it. He struck me forcefully with his left fist, which made contact with my jaw. And then I want to talk about the injuries and getting medical clearance and how I took him to the ground and how I secured him, which staff arrived to help me, and that whole penumbra of things that goes along so that we establish all the elements of the crime. But we also want to be sure that we're able to document the things that are necessary with regards to policy and procedure, so that being in compliance with that, we can dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that we've done our job to the fullest of our ability.
Yeah, we're going to get into more details with the body, but we definitely have to use that because that's obviously where the basically that motivates you to act. If you got an inmate that's violating policy or procedure, that's a good justification now for you to get involved and do what you have to do. If a inmate punches you in the face, now you have 100%. I got to protect myself. I took the inmate down, and and by the way, I like what Russ said. He made contact my face as a correctional police officer. Hey, Joe, what's your thoughts on the importance of that introduction and those components of scope, purpose, the contextual background before going into the body, because we'll get into the body shortly.
Well, the intro is what, I say sets the stage for the play. I always used to call it the 3 P's: person, participants, purpose. The person writing the report, the participants that were involved, and the purpose of the report. Our preamble, if you will. And generally on reports, you give a short preamble. Especially on official like disciplinary reports. You always talk about what the general purpose for this, or the specific purpose is for this report. And it always starts off with a preamble, such as, I, Lieutenant Joe Pomponio, on such and such date, such and such time, gave a direct order to inmate Hamilton to turn around and allow the applications of handcuffs, and said offender failed to obey the order. After that is when you go into your body or your report and specifics. Basically the introduction to your report is telling the reader or readers what the general purpose of that report is for. So they can look at that and look at your preamble and say, okay, so This guy, they were trying to put handcuffs on this guy and he resisted. Okay. Now that we know why the report was initially written, now let's find out the specifics why. And that's, that's where you go into the body of your report. So a good introduction into why you're writing the report is a good thing. As long as it's short, sweet, and to the point. Don't over encumber the preamble. You'll have plenty of time to do that in the body of your report.
Yes. And guys, I want to mention something here, guys. Remember, the people that are going to be reading this report, and we'll get to it a little bit later on, especially as they get higher, not all of them work in corrections. So, the more context you can provide, as long as it's not overwhelming, can lean in your favor. Because, again, it's you got to put something in their head, because if you don't, they're not going to look at it from the perspective of a law enforcement professional. So they're going to look at it as a, let's say use of force. Use of force is never pretty. People question takedowns and why was he taken down so hard? And well, when someone's coming at me and I don't know what they're going to do to me, I'm not looking to protect them first. I'm protecting myself until I can get control. So that first takedown is usually the worst thing that's going to happen to that inmate who acts foolish. They're going to get slammed to the floor because the officer is not worried about at this point protecting that inmate. They're worried about protecting themselves. And then once they get the matter in control is when we expect them now to kind of balance, safety for both parties. But that initial interaction is usually going to be the most extreme. So again, as we said, you got to paint the context. You got to paint what this report's going to be about, and basically the purpose, the scope. And I think that really matters, as I said, because it kind of lets people know what you're going to cover here and what you're not going to cover. And then later on, when you got to lean on that report for whatever it is, you could stand firm on that, saying, hey guys, it's clearly in the scope. This is what I was going to, this is what the report covers. Outside of that, guys, I'm not really too familiar with an incident that happened 5 or 10 years ago. I'm not denying, I was there. I wrote the report, but I really got to lean on my report on this one because I don't remember it, because this is rather routine work at this time. Now for the body, as I said, is where all the details go. The body is basically you. Let me just get to that point because I took all notes for this. The body is right here. The purpose of the body, it's the core of the report where detailed information, analysis, and findings are presented. Systematically covers all aspects of the topic or incident being reported. Components of the body is this section should be divided into clear, logical sections with headings and subheadings to guide the reader. Each section should focus on specific aspects of the report, such as methodology, observations, analysis, and evidence. The body details. So the body should provide comprehensive and detailed information supported by date, observation, and any other relevant evidence. It's important to maintain objectivity and clarity. So it's a description of the incident. So as I said, after you give the scope, whatever it is, it's like however you guys want to open it up, but on the above date and time in this location. So you do answer the W's, an H, the how. And as I said, I like what Russ said. You answer the why in a justification as to why you did something. You may not know the why an inmate did something. Let the hearing officer decide that, but you will answer the why you may had to have done something, because you should know why you have done something. But the body is obviously probably the most important part of that report. So you really need to give it respect by having a strong introduction. If you have a strong introduction, it will complement the body and paint the picture that you want to paint. So, because again, you could have details with no context and the body won't matter. If I got details, but I got no context, no good introduction, those details don't matter. It doesn't matter because I don't have the context to support those details. But Joe, let's go with you first, Joe. The body, the core of the report. What's your take on that?
The body of the report, to me, I like to see a good flow of chronological events. I want to know specifics of what happened from from the start of it to the end of it. There has to be good flow chronologically. You can't skip a step and then come back to it while you're in the body. Like I said, you got to make sure it's got good flow. You got to make sure, don't use 3 paragraphs to describe something that you can do in 3 sentences. Again, don't over encumber it. Sometimes when you try to over encumber things and pad it with what you think is, knowledge or it's that could be something that opens the door for some sort of legality later on. Keep it simple, keep it concise, keep it complete, keep it clear. Like I said, for me, when I look at the body report, I like to see a good chronological flow of events of what happened from the time that you stepped into the situation to the time the situation was over. A lot of people tend to overpad the reports and try to use $1 million words, and you don't have to do all that. Keep it simple, keep it clear, because you got to remember that you may not be the only one that sees this report. This report can be seen by a jury, it can be seen by a judge, it can be seen by attorneys, it can be seen just by news media, it can be seen anywhere. Is one of the reasons why you want to keep it clear, keep it concise, complete. The way you write is a big factor in the body of a report. For me, I could use the big words all day long. I choose not to. I'd rather not. Because, as somebody who's been to federal court and has had to testify over a report that was written, and having to clear up answers and facts over somebody else's report that, use these $1 million words and try and sway juries with these words. And, the biggest thing is, to make sure that it's understandable, not only to you, but make sure it's understandable to anybody else who may have to read it. A lot of people take for granted that, when you write a report in a detention facility or in a prison environment, that it's never going to leave the prison or it's never going to leave your facility. And it's not the case. I've had several of my reports leave the facility. They think they'll never be seen by the public. It can, everything that we write is subject to the Open Records Act. So, just make sure it's professional, make sure it's clean, make sure it's clear and understandable to the general, if somebody from the general public were to have to see it.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm reading stuff now. Hey, Russ, there are people that I know that when they write a report, they actually have a checklist, and the checklist kind of tells them to make sure when they write the body or the whole report itself that they hit these components. And I want to mention just a few because I actually mentioned this in my book as well with the report writing. They said this: when it comes to preparing for your report, because I didn't cover this in this, but it's in my book. I do discuss preparation for reports, which includes like interviews, whatever it is. But they say you got to understand the purpose of what you're trying to write. So you want to ensure you understand why the report is being written and what it aims to achieve. Got to know your audience. We talked about that multiple times already. So you identify who will read the report and tailor the content to their needs and expectations, and collect all necessary data, evidence, and documentation before you start. Then you got the structure. You outline the report. You create an outline to organize your thoughts and ensure a logical flow. And then that was the one thing that both you guys both said. Obviously, the key to a good report, formal report, is chronological order. I have seen people literally, it may sound like such a simple thing to do, but people that have literally written a report and the order is all over the place. But this is some of the things they say. If you let me get a little further up here, because I sent out two messages. Where is it? It's right here. So this is what it says. When you organizing information logically, it says use a clear heading and subheading. I've actually seen templates now electronically that actually, depending on what type of incident you're writing, it kind of puts a little subtitle up there, and then you just got to answer what's underneath those. And it's very formal, very quick read, but it actually does guide the reader pretty well. Then you have what do you call it? Ensuring your reports are coherent and flow, but also I think Joe mentioned consistent. You got to make sure there is consistency in the report. We talked about the importance of chronological order. So if incident reports present information in chronological order, it's essential for accurately documenting the sequence of events. And then also you want to make sure it's clear, as I said, consistent, relevant, and that you're also proofreading what you're putting in. But I want to ask a question, and I'm sure you've dealt with this before, Russ, as a supervisor, the inconsistency in someone's report writing, whether it's from the intro to the body or intro straight down to the conclusion of the report. I mean, inconsistency in a report is where they will get you legally. They are looking. That's the first thing when those reports go up to the courts. They're looking for inconsistency, whether it's on an individual report or whether it's when all the reports are put together to make a packet. You're muted, Russ. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's where you can, get into some troubles. If there are inconsistencies, especially if there are inconsistencies, that we've created ourselves with regards to things like jargon and so forth. We want to try and not use those type of things. We want to use everything as standardized as possible. So, the fact that, you have a little pet name for some unit that you walk into, you don't want to put that in your report. You want to use the actual geographical location and what it's titled. If it's building B in front of section A or whatever it is, you want to stick to those terms that anyone could recognize, or that they could easily recognize if they were oriented towards, what your prison, what your facility, what the unit or whatever looked like. The next thing that you want to do is, you want to try and standardize the type of things that you do. If you are using an MK9 oleo resin capsicum pepper spray projector, that's what you want to put, in the whole type of even though that does sound like jargon, it's actual technical jargon because it actually means something. And it's very specific because it's also printed right on the bottle. Now, you might have something that's slightly different than I used to use. You might have the OCV, which is vapor, or you might have the foam or whatever it is. But use the proper technically correct terms and not the jargon. And then try and make sure that that when you're training your people up and you're talking about the uses of force, that you have as standardized usage as is possible, especially when you're using things like batons and things like that, because you're going to have to fill out things that are perhaps more than just talking about it in the body of your form. Like when we would use baton for a strike or something like that, we would have to mention the type of, whether it's a forward spin technique, and we had like a little thing where we would circle the part of the baton that we used in conjunction with the part of the anatomy of the inmate where we struck and things like that. And it was all really important, and if people just go in there willy-nilly and they kind of, guess like, hey, well, I saw Officer Hamilton strike him in the thigh, and it turns out that the guy has a broken tibia. Well, it gets hard to square that. And even though you can explain it in court later, it's better not to have to do that. It's better to be able to, be all on the same page and leave some room for some ambiguity. And that's not to say we're doing anything shady, but just when things are happening and they're happening fast and you don't know for sure exactly what happened, don't put in things where you can't back away from that conclusion, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And I want to mention something. What also comes with the buy, exactly what Russ is saying. You got to present information logically and clearly. We talked about use headings and subheadings, blah, blah, blah. But now when it comes to the conclusion is when you're wrapping everything up. You summarize the key findings. You restate the importance of the report, and you provide clear conclusions based on the information presented. In some cases, this is true too. I've seen this on the administrative side for the administrative reports. We actually may even go a step further and write down recommendations, especially if there's a concern that could lead to liability. We're going to want to put in the report some recommendations as to what we're going to do moving forward, especially if there's an error that, in the incident where something happened that shouldn't have happened. We're going to have to note what the concern is, how we addressed it, but then what are we doing to prevent future occurrences? And I believe a lot of people. Here's the funny thing when it comes to those reports. I've seen a lot of people when they write their reports and they get to the conclusion, they may do a good summary, but something could require a recommendation. And what they do is they wind up doing a follow-up memo. It shouldn't be, I mean, you may have to create one later on, but you should really write the recommendation in the report as well, because it notes preventive measure from it happening again, because that report could be pooled at any time. And as I said, it's great to let them see right at the get-go that as soon as this incident happened, and when you wrote on that immediate report, you wrote immediately, these are the steps I'm going to be taking. And I kind of actually learned that when I crossed into administration, because I'm thinking when I wrote reports as an officer, even as a sergeant, I really didn't write anything about recommendations going forward. I just wrote what happened, whatever it is, very simple. And then when it came to include, my conclusion, this was a summary of what occurred. But I never thought about writing recommendations until I crossed into administration, and now we are responsible for all efforts preventive. So I do find myself writing recommendations in an effort to let people know that, yeah, we slipped up, but we're aware that we slipped up, and that also, that recommendation also aligns with integrity and transparency. I'm not denying it. There's a mistake here, and that's why the recommendation is in. A lot of people may be afraid to put the recommendation in because they're going to think that the recommendation admits they failed. I think, guys, if there's an incident that happened and it's an incident that may be unique, that there's just nothing, it's just unique, nothing you really could have prepared for, the recommendation matters, because that shows that you're being prevented if it happened again. So you're taking what could be a mistake or a failure, and you're actually learning from it. And that actually builds a greater level of trust. But I'll go with Joe first. Russ first. What's your thoughts on the conclusion, and then including, all those components, but also including that recommendation? I mean, would you start seeing that more from supervisors and not so much from the officers when it comes to the recommendation side?
So I would say this, from the level that I was at, and wondering about maybe what goes on with regards to administrative types and so forth. I think I would be a little bit wary of including that with reports that are getting batched in, because that might in some way tip up a lawyer to possibly open some kind of problems with our liability. I think that that more should fall into something more specific, which would be an after action review. But then again, I was never at that level. But just the way I would see it, I would think, hey, before we throw a flag on the play on ourselves, let's be sure and include everything that we need to include, but let's not bring attention to all of our shortcomings necessarily. And I am a big proponent of transparency, but I also know that that being human, we're going to have things happen that simply aren't our fault or aren't necessarily within the span of our control on a day-to-day basis. And I think sometimes, just thinking that we should always have some type of optimal outcome in mind is just really not productive in ways that really help with the mission with which we're tasked.
Right. And then, so I get what you're saying. So it kind of is like a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because I get the concern where, is it admitting that we have a failure? And at that point here, when you get those lawyers, they don't really care what you did, your corrective action. They just want to point that you failed. So they can kind of exploit the failure. So they look at where you admitted the failure, and then they go ahead and exploit it. But I think like a lot of the cases in corrections, believe it or not, are really the corrective action. I think a lot of the stuff with corrections is really about, okay, this happened. What was the follow-up? because they know we're dealing with a lot of unpredictability. So having said that, I think a lot of the lawsuits that happen in corrections deal with, once you're aware, how did you prevent it from happening again? And I think there is a level of integrity that comes with those recommendations that showcase that we're not perfect at this point. But I do get what you say, because I think when it comes to recommendations where, staff really failed at a very basic level, where it's really corrections 101, something that you're expected to do, like not doing tours. That's something you want to do at an after review report, because, the recommendations is not going to be a change of policy or procedure. It's going to be disciplinary. So I think when it comes to the recommendations, it may be a recommendation on a procedure that needs to be changed, and not something in regards to, I'm going to go ahead and be punitive and write up all the officers. That's not what it is. I think a recommendation is, yes, something happened here, and unfortunately, it's a unique situation. We really didn't have a policy or procedure for this type of thing. So my recommendation at this point is to create a procedure that go ahead and could address the uniqueness of a situation. Because as I said, once it happens once, it could happen again. But Joe, what's your thoughts on recommendations? Because it could admit to some vulnerability, but I think if it's crafted well, it also showcases preventive measures and a little bit of transparency.
It does. Of course, your frontline staff and your entry level supervision probably won't have a need or has really any reason to be involved in that aspect of the conclusion. When you're doing an administrative review, it's more basically for your administration to kind of look at the whole general situation and say, okay, this didn't get done correctly. This didn't get done correctly. Like, for example, use of force. The lieutenant's job was to gather all the reports, do a summary, and turn in the use of force packet, and note any observations that he or she sees that may have gone wrong with the use of force in their summary. And when it goes to the administrative level, such as your majors and your wardens, and they do the administrative review not only gives, a list of the people involved, it gives, the whole scenario from start to finish. And, when it comes down to the bottom, they have a section for what they call employee action or inaction, where you can note things such as, Officer J. Pomponio was seen on the video camera placing hand restraints, however, did not double lock the handcuffs when the use of force was over. Inmate inadvertently bumped into a cabinet on his way to medical, which caused the restraints to tighten up on his hands and caused a small bruising to his left wrist. That's where you can kind of address and kind of show your transparency. Officer J. Pomponio was issued a letter of instruction ensuring that any uses of forces that may ensue after this one is to ensure that, when placing restraints that, they're double locked. That's something where you can kind of notate you or get ahead of the game or get ahead of the ball, if you will. It's kind of it's a double-edged sword, because you open up yourself to some sort of liability just with that specific, scenario. But at the same time, it also allows the administration of your facility to address something on paper that prohibits anybody above them off the facility, either in a regional or an executive leadership position, to come back and say, okay, hey, look, he didn't do this. I want a formal disciplinary on that officer for that. Can't do it because it's already been addressed with a letter of instruction. So it's a lesser of two evils. You either put yourself out there for the public to pick you apart or for litigation to pick you apart, or you can actually use it as a tool to not only train your officer, but protect them from further further disciplinary sanctions as the report goes up the ladder off the unit. Like I said, your entry level staff, such as your frontline officers, your sergeants, probably will not ever have to worry about putting a conclusion in there, because it's really not their position to conclude anything. It's their position to tell us what actually happened in their report. It's our jobs as lieutenants, because we were actually the ones that had to do these administrative reviews, which is a great learning tool for any lieutenant, because it opens your eyes to a total situation of what happens, not necessarily, not just underneath you, but also above you and off your unit. So the lieutenants generally are the ones that give the initial brief general conclusions as to what they've seen transpire that may be an issue. But when your administration actually gets a hold of this report and does theirs, that's supposed to be forwarded on to the executive branch and may go to the Office of General Counsel or whatever for filing. That's where the administration can look at the total circumstance and say, okay, this is what we observed wrong in the video. This is what happened as a result of that. And this is what we did to correct that. And this is what we're doing to correct it in the future. Like I said, it's a double-edged sword, because, you're putting yourself out there for litigation to pick you apart should it go that far. But at the same time, it's also a great tool for wardens or, administration to kind of protect their officers, especially if it was a simple mistake, a small mistake that didn't rise to the what you felt didn't rise to a formal disciplinary to try to tarnish somebody's career over something simple. It's their way of protecting you at the same time.
Yeah, and there's some examples here. It says, if you do contextual framing, you provide a context for recommendations to show they're part of a broader strategy for improvement. So while recommendations can imply recognition of areas needing improvement, they do not inherently admit fault or liability if framed appropriately. By using neutral language, focusing on improvements, basing recommendations on facts, consulting legal advisors. Sorry, and I think that when we come to conclusions, guys, it could be more of just conclusions in regards to what our actions were and when we were done with what our efforts would be. And then I want to move it back over, because I want to talk about some of the common mistakes people make when they're doing these reports. And guys, feel free to stop me if there's a mistake that you guys want to explore. And I like how we kind of mentioned that you always want to prepare a report as if you're going to present it. I think that's pretty accurate, because at any moment you could wind up having to present that. So one of the things we have here, or just some of the common pitfalls here, and forgive me if they repeat themselves, but I don't think they do, but some may. So lack of structure, which we just talked about. So I think lack of structure are people that may just write a report with a body with no introduction or no conclusion, or a conclusion, or I'm sorry, an introduction and a body and no conclusion. Incoherence, reports that lack coherence can be confusing for the reader. Omitting key information, poor chronological order, which we talked about. But I like this one.
Can I?
I'll go ahead. Of course.
So when we're talking about, chronological order, I mean, although that seems really simple, just think about the way that you're actually writing the report. And some people have a harder time with some of these things than others, but always try and make sure that when you're doing the report that you stay in what's called the active voice, where you're going from one step and one act to another, and you're not referring back. For instance, if I said I placed inmate Jones in handcuffs in front of the chow hall after having pursued him across the yard, you're kind of doing that ass backwards. You would want to say something more to the effect of, I was in a foot pursuit across the yard directly behind inmate. Did I say it was Smith Jones? I forget who I used now. But then I caught up to him at the chow hall, at which time then I placed him into restraints. You always want to keep that last one, which is the active voice, where you don't refer back. It's kind of like passive voice is kind of like Yoda speak, where you're putting where you're putting two different actions that happened in a different order, and you're kind of backtracking over it. You don't want to do that because it lacks clarity. So that's one thing to keep in mind while you're writing these type of reports, in order to make sure that you're doing things in the proper order. Don't get fancy with the way that you're speaking about things.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Russ, let me ask you another question, because this matters too. There's such a balance here, because one thing says, oh, you can't omit details, but then another pitfall is giving out too many details. I mean, how does that play out, Russ, when you get those reports that just, because I think if you see too many details, it also becomes too confusing.
It can be. I think that the way you handle details is by parceling out those details at the right time within the body of the report. So if you're doing that, it will make it less confusing. I think that one of the problems is I used to have some supervisors that would tell me, oh, put in as little as possible, and then you strip down the thing to as little as possible, and suddenly the elements of the crime or the charge that you're trying to support aren't there anymore. And that's one of the things that I harken back to when I was talking earlier is being able to write a good report. You have to be able to know and understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes when you're writing a report and you're trying to establish what's going on with the charge, you should be aware of what a lesser included offense actually means, so that if there's not quite enough to support what you've charged an inmate with, that you can get them on the next thing down. It's like the difference between attempted escape and being being in an out of bounds area. Well, in order to commit the escape, you have to at some point have been out of bounds. But the lesser included offense is going to be, having been out of bounds. And so when you're structuring your report, you have to be able to go into those things, and you have to be able to support every single element. And you have to know what that means, both in the penal code and, in your departmental operations manual or your Title 15 or whatever it is that you use to charge inmates with. And some places will use the penal code, some places will use their local code, and some places will use both. So you have to be aware of those things. And a good report writer knows about them all and understands the disciplinary process and understands the investigative process and all those things that go along with it. And that's why, what we're attempting to do tonight is just give you a few of the basics, because this thing could go on hours and hours and hours. I'm sure between Joe and Anthony and I, we've all spent a lot of time on that typewriter and doing these kind of things in real life.
Yeah, and I want to mention before we move up to the next part is before you submit it, because we're going to kind of move away from the structure real quick, is you want to review and edit. You want to check for clarity and coherence. You want to proofread the grammar and spelling. Verify data and evidence. Look for consistency. Supervisors also who oversee those reports should look for those consistencies or inconsistencies, because if you got a packet that's incomplete by the time it gets to the administrator, it's embarrassing, because it's went through so many hands to go ahead and tell the story that needs to be told. Format and presentation, you want to use a consistent format. That's why a lot of places are come up with templates. I like the fact that people are saying you should include page numbers, because that actually does hold weight. If it's missing a page, it's like, hey guys, I see 1 and 3, where's 2? Use visuals when appropriate. And the final steps is review the final draft, seek feedback, finalize the report before submission. Anything on that checklist before we go to the next part? I'll go with Joe first. Anything with what about the page numbers? Anything that you want to add to, Joe, on that?
No, it actually sounds pretty direct and pretty correct. Just making sure that all your forms are in a good flowing chronological order. Especially when it comes to like use of force packets and administrative reviews. Where you have pages amongst pages amongst pages amongst pages amongst pages of evidence that you put with it to send off to your Office of General Counsel. You want to make sure that everything's all your I's are dotted, T's are crossed, everything's grammatically correct. And before you hand that over to them, you want to make sure everything has a good flow to it and a good chronological order as well, even including your evidence, whether it be written, photos, make sure everything's labeled the way it should be, with good identification.
Yes. And then any thoughts on that, Russ, before we go to the next section?
Yeah, I think that, that's a good point by Joe. Is like sometimes, we would, being processing, evidence, sometimes we would have, weapons. The big one that we always had, like Joe said, there was photos, is because we'd be taking pictures of injuries. Sometimes we'd be taking pictures of where inmates were laying on the ground, after we managed to get, some control over the incident. Sometimes we'd be taking pictures of their IDs as to where they showed up. Sometimes we'd be doing schematics. And so we would have to usually try and produce some type of comprehensive list of every single bit of evidence that we had. And then we have to, of course, put a disposition on that. Who processed it? How did they process it? Where was it processed at? And all of those things. And so, it really helps, if you can have someone, especially on those larger incidents, we would call them scribes, and they would be the ones that would be actually, inputting certain types of data like inmate names and numbers and things like that. And that would kind of free some of us up to start doing things like moving bodies around, handcuffing guys and placing them in holding cells and things like that. And meanwhile, the scribes would be making sure that they were getting all of that ancillary information about evidence, about inmate names, about where they were laying, about who was escorting them. Because in the end, they could get very complex, because sometimes we'd be doing cuffing operations where we'd have 200 or 300 inmates that we would be handcuffing over the course of a big incident. And if you're not careful, you can start to lose the integrity of that incident. And suddenly you've got, 4 or 5 guys over here, and you don't know where they ended up in the incident. And you can't even prove if they were involved. And you try and go back and look at the video, and it's just not there. And so you want to try and take control of those things and make sure that you can answer all of those questions: where the inmate ended up, who escorted them from that and to where, because, it could be medical. And we want to be able to prove in the end that we complied with all of our policy and procedure with regards to getting people cleared, having their injuries attended to, and all of those things. So it can just be a big mess.
Yeah. And guys, one last thing before we move over, we got one more section we want to cover. And guys, this is just a brief technically discussion. It's only almost 2 hours, right now, hour and a half, but the book's going to have a lot more when we offer it. But there's just so many angles here. But I want to add one more thing, because we didn't get really a chance to cover the preparation of reports. There's a lot here to cover, but I just want to kind of go over just quick little 12 tips. I'll just reiterate. I'll just say it right now, because then I want to get to the next part. But understand the purpose of your report. Know your audience. Gather information. Create an outline. Set clear goals. Choose a quiet environment. Use reliable sources. Keep it simple. Organize your notes. Set a timeline. Take breaks if you get overwhelmed. And seek feedback early. Now, I have in the book, it has a whole section on that. It's a little bit more detailed, including note gathering, stuff like that. But I want to get to this part now. This is the psychological aspect of report writing. So, guys, after you commit to an incident, you're going to be tired, you're going to be overwhelmed, and you're going to be told you have to write a report within a certain amount of time. And that is very overwhelming in corrections. There's in some cases, it could be a 24-hour time limit for an incident to be written. And your mind may not be right. It really does depend on what the incident is and how you react or how you feel after the incident's done. So basically, when it comes to your mindset, it's very important that you have a clear mind and that you're able to focus on that report. And to be honest with you, only you know that. I mean, yes, you're going to have good supervisors, maybe able to discern it after they read it. It's like, yo, this ain't making any sense. You're a little all over the place. This isn't you, Russ. This isn't the usual reports I get from you. Or are you okay? This incident gets you a little bit. But with that said, you should know if your mind is ready to go ahead and commit to a report that is probably could be career saving in most cases. I mean, when you're writing an incident, you're not writing a report that is superficial in nature. You're writing a report that could be utilized at any time to save your career or to go against the credibility in which you can lose your career. So one of the things are some of the things that they mentioned when it comes to a writer's mindset, and I'd love to get your thoughts, and I'll start with Russ first, is first you got clarity and focus. So a clear and focused mindset is essential for organizing thoughts and presenting information logically. This helps in avoiding confusion and ensuring that the report is easy to follow. One of the strategies here is with preparation. Before starting the outline, outline the key points and structure of the report. This provides a roadmap and helps maintain focus. And then it says the environment, create a distraction-free environment to write. This could involve setting aside specific times for writing when you're least likely to be interrupted, and then breaks. Take regular breaks to avoid burnout and maintain mental clarity. Hey, Russ, have you ever been directed to write a report right after the heat of the moment?
We always wrote immediately after the heat of the moment, and always, I would say, before we went home. As a matter of fact, one of the hardest reports that I ever wrote was, even though it wasn't a violent incident, was we had a flood in one of our buildings, and I was there for 27 hours and had to write an incident report at the end of it. And that was really difficult because I was in control and been receiving counts of inmates all night long. So that's, pretty typical is when we had an incident, a reportable incident, you were going to write before you went home each and every time. And you just better really get good at it. And the way you get good at it is putting yourself into a position that you have to write all the time. And so, that's pretty much what I did I never shirked on that. I just, I've seen guys, wring their hands. Oh, something happened and I have to write. No, man, I made something happen. And now I'm glad I have to write because now I get to really, prove my skills. But that's just my assessment.
Yeah, and Joe, maybe we'll speed up a little bit. We'll go to the next part, and then we'll have you talk about the next part because we're kind of going over an hour and a half, and I want to make sure people get at least the core of what we're discussing here. Another part when it comes to the psychological aspect of report writing is objectivity. The importance is maintaining objectivity ensures that the report is factual and unbiased, and focus on presenting data and evidence without letting personal opinions or emotions influence the content. I was always taught right at the very beginning, be careful what you write. Definitely have someone else see it. Again, not an effort to change the report, but, to make sure it sounds okay, because sometimes our biases do get into that report and we may not see it because it's unintentional. And even sometimes when we talked about jargon, or acronyms, like I took the inmate to the ACSU or whatever it is, that's not going to translate well. As a supervisor, you're reviewing these things. It's like, hey guys, this person's writing as if he's a correctional officer, and that's great. But the people that are reading it aren't correctional officers. So he's going to have to simplify it a little bit so it can translate well when it travels up, because we do want to create a good picture. But Joe, I think a supervisor or a peer review does help alleviate the concern with being subjective, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your frontline supervisors, when they get these reports, their job is to look over and try to find any mistakes that can rule out any further errors as the report progresses up the chain of command, before it reaches its final destination. One of the hardest things to do when you're writing a report is to not use jargon, because we used it our whole career. That to us, it becomes everyday, normal, basic language for us. And, which, everybody in our profession at your facility will understand what you wrote. But when that thing leaves the unit, they may not understand, just like you said. And sometimes having that frontline supervisor look at these reports is a good thing too, because, you know, you have a lot of people that use so much slang that, you know, that actually carries over into their reports. They actually use that in their reports. I have one that, you know, guy turned into me after he used force, and he actually put in his report that while he was taking the inmate to the ground, his homie came and hit him in the head with a trash can lid. You know, so having somebody read those reports that has an objective view, that knows that these reports are going to leave the unit and, you know, stop the small things in its tracks, it's a good thing. You know, the more people that proofread it, the better. Because, you know, like, you know, Russ, you know, after 27 hours, dude, there is no telling what I'm fixing to put on this piece of paper. You know, after 27 hours, your mind wanders. You know, it's bad enough that, you know, the incident happened. It's bad enough that happened in itself. But then the fact that, you know, just like Russ's agency, you know, in Texas, it's the same thing. You had any documentation that needed to be done had to be done before you went home at the end of your shift. Which means if you had to stay over to do it, it had to be done. So, you know, you got that psychological aspect of it too. You got some people that are gung ho and ready to do it. And then you got some people who are like, you know, the hell with this. But the more people that can read this report, unbiasedly and have it, you know, viewed objectively to rule out any further errors or, you know, any omissions, is a good thing.
Yeah, and guys, it's funny too. Like, let's say you want to put that an inmate's being disruptive. You got to make sure you make that a verb. You got to be able to showcase how they're being disruptive, or the inmate's being aggressive, you know, or is always aggressive. You know, is that your opinion, or can you show me how they're being aggressive? Oh, you said, as I said, same thing with disruptive. Is that your opinion, or can you show me how they're, or can you explain how they're being? Because I don't see anything in the report
Yeah, how?
that says, yeah, how, right? You know, I just see it says you labeled them as disruptive.
I think one of the biggest ones in that aspect, or when they put in the reports that, you know, they act like a psych patient. Are you saying he is a psych patient? How do you know he's a psych patient? Or he was acting psychologically interfered with.
Right. And then for the next part, Russ, it talks about confidence. So again, definitely relates to the psychological aspect of report writing. And what it says about confidence is confidence in writing translates to a more assertive. I like that, by the way, because real quick, if you're not confident in what you're writing, that could translate onto the paper. All of a sudden, your statements become a little bit more tentative and really not factual. And then when that makes it up to the courts, they'll rip you apart because they don't feel that you were really confident in what you were writing. And I love the fact that confidence gives you that assertiveness, that authority tone, which can enhance the report's impact. I love that. That's actually really good advice. Strategies, thorough research, being well informed about the topic boosts confidence. So ensure you have all necessary information to understand it fully. Practice. Regularly writing reports can improve skills and build confidence over time. So there's the confidence in the competency level of writing a report, but there's also the confidence in knowing what you're writing. Is this an evidence-based report? Like, are you leaning on evidence or are you leaning on opinion? And then the positive mindset. Approach the writing process with a positive attitude, focusing on your strength and previous success. I love what Russ said before that we can underscore is you're gonna want to write that report, not being told you have to. You're gonna want to go in with wanting to write that report. So at this point, you give it the effort. Russ, when it comes to confidence, you know, the thorough research, the practice, the positive mindset, does that help translate into a more assertive, authoritative report? And why do you want that authoritative report or that assertive report? How does that translate?
So, you know, there's a lot to that you brought up. One of the things that, you know, I always wanted to do and establish, especially when I was writing disciplinaries, is I wanted the win. I wanted to prove that I could.
Sorry,
what's that?
My phone went off. Hold on a second. Hold on.
Something's going. Hello? Okay. I'm going now. Where was I? Oh, okay. I was saying that I always wanted to showcase my abilities to, insert myself into a situation and then be able to, articulate the circumstances regarding that in a way that supported the charge that I was levying against the inmate. In a way that I was able to, almost 100% of the time, always come in with, getting that guilty verdict. And the only times where, that I ever failed in that were sometimes where I would be the primary on a case, on a big one, and we would be writing lots and lots of inmates. And it was never a thing where it was just my report. It was everybody's in general. Like sometimes if we had a big incident of 100 inmates or something, I'd write all 100 of them with my report being the overview. And so sometimes I couldn't substantiate necessarily that, but on a one-to-one basis and going in and, finding people doing dirty deeds and so forth, all the time I was able to, come out with wins on that, and in a legitimate fashion by being able to write well enough that I could get what I saw, heard, and experienced, in front of that hearing officer and be able to put them in my shoes through my writing abilities.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because when people are writing reports, you have several different styles of reports. You got the people that actually want to write the report because they were part of the incident. You have those people who write the report like they're being held hostage to write the report because they either witnessed the incident or, you know what I mean? You know exactly what I'm talking about. And then, you got the people who write the short reports that, just to get out of it. I didn't see nothing, hear nothing, know nothing. The way you write the reports, it has to be with confidence. It has to sound like that you were part of the scenario, that you wanted to be part of the scenario. And because you were part of the scenario, you're here writing this report. The amount of confidence you put into a report matters, because, when other people are reviewing it, I see a report from Hamilton, a full chronological report. And then I see one from Gangi that's 3 sentences long. Inmate came in, hit Hamilton. Hamilton slammed offender to the ground. I helped handcuff. End of report. And then, you got the ones that, make it sound like they're being held hostage to write the report. That's why, and I agree, confidence matters in the way you write the report, because whoever's reviewing it has to know that, it was done with confidence, that you were part of the scenario, that you were observant of what took place in the scenario. And, and later on down the road that you may be a good witness or a bad witness in testifying in that situation, which may or may not ruin a career.
Just, talking about all this right now, it kind of, brought me back thinking about confidence. And, my longtime partner, at the last adult joint that I was at, he was involved in an incident where he ended up firing I think it was the 37 millimeter at that time. I think it was before we went to the 40. In a single incident, I think he fired 17 shots. And in the midst of all of that, the very last thing that he almost did was he chambered around on the Mini 14 and leveled it at a guy's head. I mean, the incident was really serious. We ended up with, probably over 40 or 50 inmates injured, I would say, at least. And told the guy, to stop what he was doing. He had a chair. He was crushing another inmate with it. And fortunately, the guy stopped. My partner didn't have to X him out of existence. And I didn't end up arriving on scene until probably about 15, 20 minutes and kind of had things kind of controlled by the time. And anyway, they told me what my partner had done that day. And I was like, holy shit, this is going to be an incredible thing. And so I went and I found the incident commander and I said, hey, look, let me take him aside and I'm going to start helping him with the report because this is going to be really, really out of hand. And, that lieutenant, man, he had a lot of faith and confidence in me. And we were able to, I think the total pages were I think it was 7 or 8 pages long or more. And at the end of it all, it didn't require a single clarification, but it took me almost 3 hours to help him write it. And so, having people that can write good reports is invaluable. And so those are things we really want to, work on and be able to eke out, because when you have a desperate situation like that, it's really going to pay for itself, so to speak. But that was one of the most intense reports I ever helped write.
Yeah, and they add obviously when you're writing a report, it could be usually related to a high level incident. So it says you got to manage your stress. Writing reports, especially those dealing with serious incidents, can be stressful. Managing the stress is essential for maintaining clarity and focus. So they got time management, allocate sufficient time for writing and reviewing the report to avoid last minute stress. Support systems, seek support from colleagues or supervisors if the subject matter is particularly challenging or stressful, which you could see an inmate suicide, let's say, or just got assaulted. Self-care, or an officer, God forbid, got killed. Because now imagine that. Officer got killed and you got to get right back into the game and write that report. Engage in self-care activities outside of work to manage stress and maintain overall well-being. And then the motivation, important, staying motivated throughout the report writing process ensures that the final product is of high quality. Set goals, break down the writing process into smaller manageable goals and celebrate each achievement. Stay connected to purpose, remind yourself of the importance of the report and its potential impact. And then you got to get the feedback. And the conclusion is understanding and addressing the psychological aspect of report writing can greatly enhance the effectiveness and impact of your reports. Guys, as we start to, I think that's the last part. I mean, guys, this is a topic that could literally go on for days. When this book is done, me, Russ, and Joe will probably make a 5-day workshop out of it, because it's so much to cover, because there's just so many things that could be written about. But just the different styles, the different formats, what works best, what doesn't work best. But when it comes to the mental well-being, again, I just want to let you guys know that if you're able to write it or not. You may get the directive from somebody to write it, but it's okay to say, hey, I need a few minutes on this. Or, even I will say one thing, even though there may be a policy or procedure that says you got to have a report written within 24 hours, sometimes if there's reason to extend it, you just got to say it. Like, hey, you know what? This officer was assaulted. Mentally, they weren't ready to write a report. So at this point here, the 24 hours actually is going to probably be not good, because I won't be able to trust the integrity of that report at that point, because there's so much stress and so much pressure for this person to produce after they just gone through it, that the report at that point, I just won't trust in its integrity, because there's going to be a lot of emotion that's going to be written into that report that won't be needed, or could bias the body or whatever, the overall integrity of the report. I mean, would you agree with that? I'll start with Joe first, then Russ. I mean, you got to be a good, you really got to know people to understand, like, can this person, I mean, I would even go as far as saying automatically setting that, like, if Russ just got assaulted or something like that, and it's a major assault, or, maybe Russ just saw a suicide that affected him, I may not want him to write a report right away. I mean, there's a lot of stress going on with Russ. He's going to lose his job. What's right? So, I mean, wouldn't that affect the outcome of that report?
Absolutely. There's nothing saying you have to write it immediately after the situation happened. I mean, you got to give time for the adrenaline to wear off. You got to give time to, breathe in, take that breath, get your area back in focus. This way you can kind of mentally prepare yourself, for the timeline. You're always going to have them one-off situations where, you can't get a report immediately, at the end of shift, or God forbid, if somebody's injured and goes to the hospital and they're given morphine or what have you, obviously you're not going to get a coherent statement from that officer. So there's always going to be those one-offs where we can justify extending an investigation due to, extenuating circumstances. But, at the same time, if you're involved in a situation, what I would always do myself is immediately jot down a timeline on a piece of paper so I wouldn't forget it. And then at the end of shift, when I've had 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours to kind of, get my area back under control, get things flowing, and give myself a chance to kind of, let the adrenaline dump a little bit. Then I would sit down and jot me a rough draft out. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be times where you just absolutely cannot write a report as soon as the incident's over. I mean, if you're frontline staff, you still have an area to run. You still have things, you have a building schedule to keep to. If the area's not locked down, there's other things going on that may prevent you from being able to do that right at the time. So, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think you have to give yourself some sort of time between the incident and the time you write the report, just to give yourself time to collect your thoughts, let the adrenaline dump, and then go ahead and write your report.
And guys, when my phone went off, I was looking up jargon that's commonly been used that actually winds up getting questioned in the court system because people may not understand the true context of what that means. In this case here, the jargon, we may know immediately what it means, but they don't know how it applies in context. So one was, and these are some things that have been written in reports that made it up to the top, was A-team. Like that's the A-team. So maybe that's a facility that has multiple shifts. AGSEG. So imagine if you wrote a report, booking. So mind you, it's without context. Just the inmate went to booking. And then after that, it's without context. It's not like the inmate went to booking and this is what booking does. It's more the inmate went to booking. Case manager, cell block, classification, contraband, count, custody level, DR, an acronym for disciplinary report, disciplinary segregation.
Texas DR means death row.
And then they have, see, that's what I'm saying.
We had CR, condemn row.
And then they got DOC, Department of Corrections, dormitory, escort, facility. I mean, kite lock. They even have visitation, warden, work detail. And these are jargon that when they made it up to the top, people asked more, like, what does that mean? What's visitation? What does that mean? Yeah, it's crazy. Words that we use every day that we think, what's an inmate handbook? What's a kite? I even have inmate. What's an inmate? You mean an incarcerated person? What is that? I don't know what an inmate is anymore because those labels are changing. I thought that was unique. There's a lot of verbiage that we use every day. The general population,
Gen Pop.
Yeah, it's right next to it. Gen Pop housing unit. Hey guys, I mean, I thought this was a good dialogue. We covered, a good amount of tips that hopefully people could find used to. I mean, as I said, as I work on the book, I think there'll be better tips. But you guys have anything like to say in closing? Joe, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Take your time in writing a report. Don't rush. Write the report as if, if a judge in a federal court, has a possibility of reading it. Don't use $1 million words. Keep your English plain. Try not to use acronyms, try not to use ebonics, try not to use, any of that. If you're not that good of a report writer, because we do have people that, aren't very well spoken and can't write a report well, don't be afraid to ask for help. Get with somebody who knows how to write a report. Let them help you. There's no shame in it. The main thing of it is always write a report as if, it's going to go to the White House. Because every report that we write has the ability to end up in a court system at some point, which they look at and go through meticulously. So just make sure you're complete and you're concise on your reports. Write it to where, the general public can understand. Try not to use acronyms. Write it with confidence, write it with decent detail. Keep it, whenever an incident happens and you have to write a report, always make you a timeline just to make sure that you have a good chronological flow to your report.
I love that. And what's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah, I think that what Joe says, really holds a lot of water. Is approach it, in the seriousness with which it needs to be approached. I'll tell you, some of the things that I see in all of the different groups that and forums that I'm in is that I think that people try and think that the report writing process is something that they can hink around with and just use it to make themselves feel better about an outcome. And what I mean by that is don't minimize what you've done. Don't try and just think, oh, I can clean this up, or I don't want to, or I feel fearful about the process because I haven't mastered this. You'll see people all the time. They'll try and use euphemisms where they'll say, "Oh, I guided the inmate to the concrete floor," or I guided the inmate to the wall. And you know what? It's not necessarily that that's a lie, but it's certainly not the truth. And it's one of those things where when it's shown on a film later, and when it's picked apart by an attorney, that it's not going to hold up, and it's going to put ourselves in a bad light. Just tell the truth. There are reasons that we use force. There are ways that we justify force that are completely within the law. So don't go into this jargonized euphemisms kind of thing where you're not giving a real picture of what's went on. I think that that's always been one of my pet peeves, because people think it's cute and people will laugh at it and people will even meme it. Stand up for what you did, and it's not that you have to justify it, but you do have to explain yourself. And that's why report writing is so critical, is to be able to show who, what, when, and why that you were within compliance of doing what you did. So, know the factors, no policy, no procedure, no state law, no federal law, no case law. And, and be able to write that thing and, and act within your capacity as a correctional officer. I've just seen too many times where, trying to think whether I should actually tell this story or not, but I've decided I will. I used to have this supervisor who was really into the jargon thing, and he always wanted me to put down, things like, I used the minimum amount of force necessary. No, you didn't, because there's no way to know that actually, right? It's impossible. You can't use that. That's jargon that should never be used. And so he would have me, say things like that. And so one day I put in there, just to show him, I said, I used the maximum amount of force, that's allowed by law, policy, and procedure. And he came completely unglued over it. And I said, well, isn't it the exact same thing? And I was just trying to show him that adding this jargon doesn't justify what we've done. We don't need to use those kind of, little catch-all phrases and things. What we need to do is we need to give a complete, accurate report on what we did and why we did it. And I hope that's not too much of a rant, but I might be getting a little bit tired here. So good night, everybody.
No, it makes sense, Russ. I mean, at the end of the day, I actually took a list of the jargons, as I mentioned, and I'm just kind of reading while you were talking, and I still use that as administrative. It's amazing when you're in the profession for so long, what you feel people may have a common understanding for, and you have to be able to remove yourself from, thinking that, hey, everybody knows this, when it's like, no, you know it because you've been in the profession so long. But guys, the dialogue here was quick, or well, not quick, long, but quick in the scope of what we're trying to cover. I think there's a lot of details here that will be career saved. And I know a lot of people look to kind of retrain themselves on the physical fitness, the stuff that saves their life. But how much do you really train or want to train on the stuff that can save your career? I mean, that's, one thing save your life, one thing save your career. So and it's funny too, for the agencies out there. I mean, how much do you invest in those things? How much do you invest in extra training for people to save their careers? You know, you get someone that writes a bad report and they get ripped apart in the courts. I mean, are you going to step up and say, well, wait a second, that's the agency's fault. We haven't given this person training since they came out of the academy, and things have changed, and we've failed to evolve the training or evolve our staff in understanding what we're now looking for in reports, which is definitely, I know a big thing now is proper labels. You're writing a report and you call it him and a he who claims that they're a she. That could open up a whole case of worms. Even though it may not be intentional, it could show bias. You got an inmate that's claiming that they're being treated unfairly in a male facility because they claim they want to be a woman and they want to go to a woman facility. And then it's like, okay, they actually put he in a report. Even though it's not intentional, they'll look at that as, hey, you're biased. Why? It says it's right in your report. It's like, no, I'm used to dealing with male inmates, and my mind is, that I'm dealing with men, but it doesn't work. It's biased. You got to be able to kind of understand where we're headed. And I think that's a big part of the one last thing. I think that's a big part of report writing. Some level of I don't know how I want to say this because I don't want it to play off too soft, but some level of sensitivity when you're writing the report, and you got to take that in context, because I know what I mean by that, but I know people are gonna maybe twist that around. But you got to show sensitivity in regards to what may be expected. I hope I said that right. Wait, hold on. We can end this, but does that make sense? Is sensitivity an okay word, Russ?
I know what you mean, and I understand it. So it's kind of one of those things where, let's see. I was trying to think. I'm tired right now, but I was trying to think if there was a better word that we could use. A more diplomatic. Yeah. How's that?
I'll take that.
Or diplomatic, or perhaps empathetic.
I was thinking of empathetic too. I'll take that. I just want to make sure that people understand what I'm trying to get at. If you use the wrong terminology, they'll take your lack of sensitivity or empathy and use it against you. They'll just spend all day worrying about the fact that you called them a he and kind of brush away from whatever the main concern is. And that's just an example
right.
how that would play out.
I agree.
All right, guys, as always, shows Terrence. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. And then maybe next time if we do report writing, we'll talk about the legal stuff, and we'll talk about the recommendation side, and we'll even talk about that sensitivity side, because that will play out at the higher level. As always, guys, stay safe.